Hi everyone, I'm Courtney and welcome back to my channel. So today's topic is going to be about how juice cleansing can be a tool to support the healing of overeating. And I'm very excited today to talk about this topic. I coach people in juice cleansing and I coach people in overeating. Those are two of the areas I specialize in. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about how these two connect and how the juice cleansing can be a tool for the healing of overeating. Now, this has been something that's helped me a lot in my journey to heal food addiction. I've seen it work for other people, and so I'm excited to talk about it and give you some information to consider whether it's something that might be beneficial for you or not. And if you do decide to do it, I'm going to be giving some important information about how you're going to need to approach it for that to happen. And then also in this video, I'm going to be talking about the kinds of people who probably shouldn't use this approach, because there are some situations where juice cleansing as a tool to heal your relationship with food may not be the ideal. So I'll be talking about who it might be better for, who it might not be good for. As always, consult a health professional before you decide to do one. And that's what we're going to talk about today. The other thing today is that today I'm going to be talking about the way that juice cleansing can help us heal the root causes. Well, it's not that juice cleansing helps us heal the root causes. It's actually that how juice cleansing can provide an environment to help us heal the root causes of our bad relationship with food or our compulsive behavior with food. So it's not going to be about specifically, well, how does juice cleansing cause you to lose weight on a physical basis, because that's a bit different topic. It's a great topic, and I may make a video about it in the future as well. But this video is really more about the root causes of the compulsive eating. So that'll be what we're going to go into. So let's get started. So the first situation I want to talk about is who this might be helpful for and why it might be helpful and how you'll need to approach it if this is something you want to try. So just to lay some basics, and I've talked about some of this in my other videos that you can go and watch more in depth. But to understand how juice cleansing can help us to heal compulsive eating, we need to look at some basics about the truth of healing compulsive eating. Now, one of the basics that underlies this whole thing is the reality is that all of our binge eating, compulsive eating, overeating is due to the desire to suppress emotions. So the reason why we struggle with this behavior with food is because in that moment or on a chronic basis throughout our lives and possibly throughout our whole life, we have used food as a medication, as a crutch, as an addiction to help us suppress our painful emotions. And so the compulsion to food, to eating too much food, to eating when we're not hungry, to eating way too much junk food, the compulsion of all that is the result of a desire that we have to suppress our emotions. Right. Now, so what that means is that in order to truly heal our relationship with food and to change these behaviors permanently, what we're going to have to do is to start looking at what emotions we're suppressing, why we want to suppress emotions, what are our beliefs about emotions, why are we so scared to connect with ourselves emotionally, and to start facing some of those truths, and most importantly, to start finally feeling the emotions that we have recently or always used food and other addictions to suppress. That is what has to happen. And when we do, now we can really have some real change in our soul, and it shows in our behavior with food. And that is how I've healed my relationship with food, gone from being a massive binge eater and fluctuating in my weight by about 65 pounds. And that's how and more than the physical thing, it's like I was tortured by food. It was like my relationship with food consumed my whole life. And the only way that it really shifted, to be honest, is to approach it in this emotionally focused way. Okay, so let's accept that as a premise. Even if you necessarily don't agree with me yet, just go along with me for now about this. So food is interesting as a compulsion or as an addiction because food is one of the few physical addictions that we can't just say, I'm just going to stop. I'm just going to quit, right? If you're addicted to, and I'm not saying these are all on the same level, but if you're addicted to some other type of physically based thing like smoking or pornography or gambling or alcohol or something else, there's something else that there's a compulsion. A lot of these things we can say, this isn't helping me, it's not helping my health, it's not helping my growth, it's not helping my life, I'm going to give it up. I'm done. And then you can say, I haven't had that for 10 years or 5 years or 50 years. Food's not like that, right? Now, I'm not saying that to imply that somehow you can't heal your relationship with food, because you can. But it is a little bit different because of that. The other thing I want to make a distinction about before I go further is that you do not need juice cleansing to heal your relationship with food. It is not a necessary thing. However, it can be a good tool. So don't think that, this is where I'm going with this, to say that you've got to do a juice cleanse in order to stop compulsively eating. Because the reality is you can choose to start looking into this emotional level of what's going on with your relationship with food. You can start doing that at any time, and you can do it while you're still eating. And in fact, that may be a subject for another video, which is the truth is, even if you use juice cleansing as a tool, you can't be on a juice cleanse forever. So eventually you're also going to need to do this process when you're not on a juice cleanse as well. So here's where the opportunity that a juice cleanse provides lies. I look at juice cleansing as it has the potential to basically be like a food addiction rehab. So if you use that metaphor and you think of it, and I know it's not great to put a parallel between food addiction and, say, drug addiction, or to compare the rehab processes of that. It's not always a good parallel. But if we use that, if somebody is addicted to some kind of physical addiction, be it drugs, alcohol, or anything else, there's lots of other kinds of things we can go to rehab for as well, right? When you go to rehab, I haven't been to any kind of rehab per se myself, but my understanding is that, part of the benefit is that you have the opportunity to now be in a healthy environment that's good for your body, good for your emotional health, and you remove that substance completely, right? So one of the benefits, or one of the approaches that rehab has, is to remove the addictive compulsive substance or behavior completely. And that helps your body come off of it. There's certainly a physical detox side of the process. But my understanding also from people I've known and what I've researched is that the other real benefit of going to rehab is that in most cases you have these opportunities to look at, well, why do I depend on this substance? Why do I go for it so compulsively? Why do I feel like I need it? What is it doing for me? What feelings am I running away from? What am I not wanting to face in my life? And my understanding as well is that a lot of the success of rehab with certain other addictions tends to depend on how much a person engages the emotional side and the sort of introspective, reflective side of that process. And the people who probably engage it more, get to some of that underlying stuff, start dealing with some of that underlying stuff, probably have a lot more likelihood in being able to not return to the dependence of that. So food is the same way in this case, if you look at it this way. So if you can go on a juice cleanse and you have the specific intention to say, I must be avoiding some things, I must be avoiding some emotions, and I really want to deal with it, and I want to look at what's really going on here, then the great thing about a juice cleanse, especially if you do it correctly, which is something that I coach on, so in other words, if you do the juice cleanse correctly so that your body gets what it needs and everything is sustained physically, that's a non-issue. If you do the juice cleanse correctly, essentially it's like the juice cleanse is a rehab environment. Because now you put yourself in a situation where you're completely physically supported in a healthy way, assuming you don't have any, pre-existing conditions, but hopefully your body will allow you to do a juice cleanse, and then if you're supported in a really healthy way, now you have the opportunity to really look at what's going on emotionally. Now, why is it that you have the opportunity, though, right, to look at stuff emotionally more? Because here's the thing, it's not a guarantee necessarily that you're going to have more emotions. What a juice cleanse does for some people, if they allow the process and if they want this, is you will tend to find that you are more emotionally triggered being on a juice cleanse than you would if you were kind of constantly being able to go for the foods to suppress the emotions, right? So if normally, as soon as you feel overwhelmed or sad or lonely or frustrated or anything, you go for some food, suddenly you're on a juice cleanse and you're trying not to do that, chances are you might feel emotionally triggered by that, And so if you're frustrated and you can't eat the food, you might feel like the anger starts to build. Or if you feel sad and you're not stuffing it down with some carbs, you might start to feel sadder and sadder. Now, that, from my perspective, is not a bad thing. Because what that is it's the truth of your emotions that are there all the time anyway. They're not new. They're not coming up they're not a result of the juice cleanse. They're always there, and it's just that now you've removed the thing that you're constantly using to push it down, and now it's coming up, of course, in that place. That's a logical thing to have happen, right? And so essentially, what you'd need to do for this to work is to do a juice cleanse, expect to be triggered emotionally, want to be triggered emotionally. I know this might sound a little crazy. Most of us are like, no, I don't want to feel anything other than happy emotions ever. Want to feel triggered emotionally and want to be emotional. And if you're sincere about approaching the healing of your soul and the healing of your relationship with food this way, if you're really sincere about this, you're going to go on a juice cleanse, you're going to have anger come up, or you're going to have your fear come up, or you're going to cry your eyes out, or all of the above. And that's what it's going to look like. And what's interesting too is not everybody approaches juice cleansing this way, but I know for me, having been in the juice cleansing world for about 13 years now, there's a lot of people who talk about this faster's high thing, where you get on the juice cleanse and after a while you just feel euphoric emotionally and physically. Now, if you do the juice cleanse right, you probably will feel pretty darn good physically fairly quickly. But what's interesting about this approach is you kind of have to give up this idea that the juice cleanse is going to give you this sort of faster's high where everything's good and you just feel great about everything. You just feel this euphoria where nothing can get you down. It's kind of like what I'm saying is basically the opposite. Let everything get you down. Because here's the truth, and I probably should have mentioned this earlier in the basics, kind of the foundational understandings about why this approach could work. The only way that painful or negative emotions leave us is by us feeling them fully to the core, to the extent finished through. That is the only way. That's the only way these emotions leave us. So if you kind of go down this domino effect, we eat because we're trying to suppress emotions, which would also suggest we've got a lot of suppressed emotions. Hold on, I'm going to sneeze. Okay, I'm back. So we eat to suppress our emotions, and that would suggest we have a lot of emotions that we're trying to suppress. Now, we've got to get rid of them. Well, the only way to get rid of them is to feel them. We have to stop running from everything that we're avoiding emotionally. We've got to start feeling stuff. And when we do that, what we're doing is we're removing the whole reason why we use food compulsively anyway. And so that puts you on your way to really healing your relationship with food and no longer struggling with either your relationship with food or your weight or health related to any of those issues. So now I thought I'd share a little bit about my experience. I think what I'm going to do is make another video that is more of a personal story of particularly, I did a 60-something day juice feast many years ago. And that was the most intense experiment that I did with this approach to healing compulsive eating. and it was really helpful. It wasn't the only juice cleanse that I did with this intention. So I've done a lot of them that are shorter as well. I've done, over the years, I've done many 5-day, 7-day, 10-day, 14-day cleanses. And so I'll probably make another video where I talk about like the 60-day juice cleanse in more depth, and I also talk about how I did it and everything. But just briefly for this video, I wanted to share about that juice cleanse. And again, the juice cleanse, the 60-day one, similar things happened as what happened on the shorter juice cleanses, but it was sort of more pronounced and more dramatic at that time. And so I thought I'd share a bit about it. So, previous to trying this 60-day juice cleanse, I had been really tortured by my relationship with food. It had been a struggle my whole life. Weight had been a struggle my whole life. I was obsessed. I binged, I overate, I ate massive amounts of junk food. It was most of what I thought about was food, how I should stop eating food, the shame, the embarrassment, but then I kept doing it, and it was just all consuming. And I was starting to read some books that, it was interesting because I was reading nutrition books. So I was reading about juice cleansing, and I was reading about physical health and natural health and plant-based nutrition and things. And interestingly, but probably not unexpectedly, none of those resources talked about really the emotional side of why we stick to diets, why we don't, what comes up emotionally when you're juice cleansing. It was all just about the physical benefits of juicing and juice cleansing. And then they would talk about that faster's high thing as well. And then I was also reading a whole other group of books that were just about healing overeating, right? And they, of course, didn't mention juicing because there's a lot of belief about that being a bad thing for healing your relationship with food, which I want to talk more about later. So a lot of those books did not encourage any type of particular quote-unquote diet or like dietary approach that would be paired with healing compulsive eating. And so I kind of came up with this idea myself, which I wasn't sure if it was going to work, but I just thought to myself, I am obsessed with food, and I can't even get out of my head, and I can't even get removed enough from this compulsion for longer than a few hours every day before I'm back in the compulsion again. I knew that I was going to need to deal with emotions. I had taken on board this idea that my compulsive eating was to do with suppressing emotions and suppressing truths about my life and how I feel and all different things like that. So I was like reading these books like, okay, I'm suppressing stuff. I'm not facing things about my childhood and my upbringing, how I feel about now and my life now and myself. And I really need to do some soul work here. But then I was so compulsive with food that I was like numb. I felt like I couldn't do the soul work because I was always numb. So then I thought, you know what? What if I do a juice cleanse and I try to do a really long one? And I knew, because I knew how compulsive I was with food, that if I was going to make it through this juice cleanse, it was going to be like I think the feeling I always had was it's going to be like walking into the fire. It's going to, emotionally, it's going to be really intense. And I also think part of the reason it worked is because I knew that, and I was kind of scared, but I wanted it, right? So that's why earlier I was emphasizing that for this to work, you have to want your emotions. You have to want the hard stuff. You can't go in thinking, oh, I really hope that stuff doesn't come up. I mean, you can, and then juice cleanse will be good for your body. But if you want to approach it, this way, you got to want it. And I tell you what, I went on this juice cleanse, and for the 2 months, something that I was on it, I regularly, and this is for the first time in my life, like up until this point, I didn't cry very often, never really felt anger, never really felt fear, because I was just numbed out all the time, so I almost thought I didn't even have those emotions, which actually wasn't true. And I went on this juice cleanse, and I cried, and I sobbed, and I raged. I mean, rage, you guys. Like, I had anger come up, I threw tantrums and fits, and I felt some fear and panic. I mean, I had so many emotions come up. At first, a lot of times they felt like it was about the food, right? So I'd get on the juice cleanse and I'd just be pissed that I couldn't eat what I wanted to. That's what it seemed like it was about. It really wasn't. But like, it really was intense emotionally, and also though, I can see that it worked because, you know, by the end of that 60-day juice cleanse, I hadn't lost all the weight that I wanted to because I was starting quite heavy. And also, my relationship with food was not perfect after that 60-day juice cleanse. However, it's like I'd healed enough of my relationship with food at that point in my life that I never went back to the level of compulsive eating and binge eating that I had been doing before that juice cleanse. So in other words, it was a permanent change. It was a permanent change, and here I am years and years later. I've never gone back to that level of compulsive eating, and I know that I never will. So I never regained the weight that I lost. I still had more to lose, but I never regained the weight I lost, and I never returned to the level of compulsive eating and binge eating that I had previous. I still did compulsively eat, I still did binge, but it was a major turning point for me. And then I had some obviously I had some faith that it worked as an approach if I wanted to feel my emotions. And so then over the years, you know, I continued to use juice cleansing, where I'd do juice cleanses and I'd have emotions come up more than they would come up if I was eating, and I would want that process to happen. And then of course I also had to do the same thing even when I wasn't juice cleansing. So again, I'm going to make a video as well on like, how do you do this if you're not going to juice cleanse? Or if you are juice cleansing, eventually you come off the juice cleanse, how do you continue the process, right? Because it's totally possible. But I just want to keep this video sort of focused on the opportunity of what juice cleanse can do. So I hope you can kind of see what I'm trying to say here. The juice cleanse itself, on its own, will not heal your relationship with food, right? So if you were to ask me that question, Courtney, if I just do a juice cleanse, will it heal my relationship with food? No, it won't. Nothing magical is going to happen. Nothing magical is going to happen where you're just going to go on, you're going to do the right thing with making all the juice and this and that, and then your relationship with food is going to be better after that. Unfortunately, the other thing is a lot of people do things on juice cleanses to actually suppress how they're feeling, like meditating can be that way, or other things where they're constantly trying to calm themselves down, calm the emotions down that are coming up when they're juice cleansing. Don't do that. So a juice cleanse itself, just like a rehab center itself, doesn't automatically heal an addiction, right? Somebody goes to rehab, they just sit there on the couch, but they're technically there, but they don't do anything else really to engage themselves emotionally. The center itself is not just going to magically heal them just because they're there. However, if you use the environment, the juice cleanse is an environment. It's not a magical thing in and of itself that does something magical to you. It's an environment that is really great, because when else do you have the opportunity to completely remove the compulsion of food? Well, you don't really. And this is a way that not only can you remove the compulsion of food, but you can, if you do the cleanse right and you've got the health, you know, the general health to be able to do it, then you're going to be healthy. You're going to have enough calories. You're going to have enough nutrients. You're going to have enough macronutrients, micronutrients, protein, everything. You're going to be fine physically. And then you have this opportunity to focus on what's going on in your heart and your soul. So that's that piece of it. Now, I want to talk briefly about who a juice cleanse might not be ideal for, and situations where it might not work for this purpose, which I kind of have already touched on a little. And again, you know, while I'm in this video, just to remind you, I'm not a doctor or a therapist, you know, so all these things, like, please check with whoever you need to have the self-care about these issues. But what I have tended to see is that people with a primarily or solely restrictive relationship with food, juice cleansing to deal with that issue is not always the best idea, because under those circumstances, a lot of those people don't struggle with overindulging. They struggle more with feeling like it's okay to eat and they're scared to eat. I went through a very short period of time for about a year in high school where I was restrictive, but the rest of the decades of all my life, I've always been overindulging, too much all the time. But I've tended to see that the juice cleanses aren't as good for people with restrictive mentalities. Again, I think a juice cleanse doesn't have any inherent power itself. It's just drinking juice. But people who already have that mindset where they're looking for things to reinforce their fear of food and their fear of eating, and they're looking for things to help them stay in this restrictive fear and this restrictive cycle, juice cleanses are not always great for. So I have tended to see that this is a better approach for people who the fear is going without the food. The terror is letting go of the coffee and the carbs and the crutch that food is. And so I talked a little bit just a minute ago about why, the juice cleanse is not necessarily inherently going to do this for you, but why it's a good opportunity. And I've got written down also that I want to make sure to talk about is that, well, just going back to the fact that you have to want the emotions. You have to want to feel your stuff. You have to want to look at your life. Because it's also possible to go on a juice cleanse, come off the food addiction, and then substitute other addictions in order to keep yourself away from yourself emotionally and keep yourself occupied. So for example, I've seen people go on a juice cleanse and yeah, they remove the food, that's great, but then they get really, really busy. They never let themselves have an idle moment, They start binge watching TV shows. They spend all their time on the internet. They figure out ways to kind of stay away from themselves emotionally. So even though they're not using food anymore, and that might even be the first time in their life they're not using food, it is very easy to substitute addictions if the desire that you have is still, I don't want to deal with my emotions. So you've got to be able to go on a juice cleanse, and you have to want to ask questions like, what are my attitudes towards emotions? What am I not letting myself feel in my life? What am I not letting myself deal with in my life? What am I not facing in my life? You have to want to face truth, and you have to want to feel those emotions. And I'm going to go real deep with you guys here. Honestly, the people that I've seen this approach work for, this is also the case with myself, and I think this is the case even if you don't do a juice cleanse to heal compulsive eating. The truth is you really might have to delve pretty deeply. When I was on my 60-day juice cleanse, it wasn't just I'm upset that my car broke down today. Not that that's a bad thing to be upset about necessarily, but it was about literally going back to my childhood, going back to the truth of where my different emotional injuries started with, where my suppressed emotions started, because for most of us, this isn't just, I need to feel about the thing that happened today or last week, although that's part of it. For most of us, to be honest, they are our lifelong suppressed emotions, lifelong suppressed pain and fear and other emotions that are at the root of our compulsive use of food. Most of them started in our childhood, most of them started in our upbringing, and there are lifelong, deeply held attitudes and beliefs about emotion, about our ability to handle emotion, to stick with emotion, about whether there's any benefit to feeling emotion. There's all this it's like this iceberg of stuff that you can only see the very top of. And anybody that I've known who has really, truly, permanently healed their relationship with food has had to go to that level. And so for me on that 6-day juice cleanse, that was sort of where I went as part of the process. So you've got to want to feel, you've got to want to engage it on that level of intensity. But the good news is I promise you, because if you do, whether you're on a juice cleanse or not, but if you can engage your own soul healing on that level of intensity, what you will notice is that your relationship with food will start changing and you won't even have to try. So I tell my clients this a lot, and I think I mentioned it in other videos, is that the way I look back at my own healing of my very severe relationship, like bad relationship with food, to where I am now, is it's sort of like, and this was both through juice cleansing, but also through a lot of time where I was doing the same things without juice cleansing, is I would challenge myself emotionally. I'd get really triggered. I'd work on some of these underlying issues. I'd feel some of my pain. I'd feel some of my emotions, face some truth, right? Have a bit of soul healing. And then my eating would get a bit better. So if I think of my compulsive eating when it was at its worst, which involved binging on thousands of calories per day, eating into the night, eating other people's food, eating stuff that wasn't even, wouldn't even taste good. If I compare the craziness of my binge eating at its worst, which let's say that was, the full capacity. It's like I'd work on stuff, I'd work on a bit emotionally, and then my eating was 10% better. Permanently 10% better. And then I'd work on more, do some juice cleanses, get really triggered, throw some stuff, break some dishes, whatever. I'm kind of joking, but I did actually do that. And then my eating was 20% better. And by the way, this was over the course of multiple years. This was not like over a week or a month. Eating is 20% better. Never got back to what it was. Permanently 20% better than that worst. Work on more, 50% better. Work on more, 70%. And so on. And so it wasn't like I did just one juice cleanse and it was all better, but it was like layers of an onion where I was working on the next level of my emotional resistances, my emotional fears that I would use food to push down. And food is still, to this day, it is still my favorite compulsion. It is still my go-to if I don't want to feel something. However, I have felt through some of my suppressed stuff, and I have a different attitude towards emotions, and I have more faith in the benefit of feeling emotions. And so now I'd say my eating is like 95 or 90-something% better than that worst case scenario. I only fluctuate by a bit with weight. I don't fluctuate by a lot. I know I'm never going to gain tons and tons of weight again. I don't ever binge anymore. Overeating looks like, not anywhere compared to what overeating looked like before. And so what's exciting about this is that you have the chance to really make some real inroads into really healing your relationship with food, because I say it in other videos and I'll say it again, no matter how bad your relationship with food is, no matter what kind of crazy things you do, no matter how long you've struggled with it, like even if you have no memories of not compulsively eating, like was the case for me, no matter how bad it is, you can heal it. And you can get to the point where food is just not really an issue anymore, and you can become like those people you probably always looked at and been like, how do they not have these issues with food that I have? All that's possible, and beyond just the benefit of healing your relationship with food, the reality is healing your soul on these levels, and working through the emotional resistances. It makes you happier. It helps clear long, deep-rooted issues, and it helps you be happier and more creative in your life and more connected to yourself and others, and God, and there's just so many benefits. So just to recap, it can be a great tool depending on how you approach it. If you have to have a desire to do the total opposite of what you've had the desire to do previously. So most compulsive eaters live in our desire to suppress all the time. You have to literally do the opposite of what you've always done, which is now aspire to have a desire to feel, and then actually do that. However, also to recap what I mentioned earlier, juice cleansing as a tool for healing a relationship with food is not always appropriate for everyone, depending on what emotions they have about food and weight. So that is something to consider as well. And I would say, if you're in a physical condition to do a juice cleanse safely, and that's going to be okay for you physically, and if it scares you, the idea of doing one, it could be worth a try. And so, yeah, I hope this has helped. If you guys have any questions about it, please always know that you can make suggestions for videos or requests for videos or ask questions, and you can submit those to me via my website at CourtneyPoole.com, because I can make more videos where I talk more about this subject, and you can ask me any questions you have to clarify, how to make the juice cleansing work in this way, or if you tried it and you didn't feel like it quite worked, what to do or why that happened, or if you did it and it did work, like, I'd love to hear about it. And, and when I say it worked, if you chose to get to some of those underlying emotions and then, are making some progress with that. I also coach people in this. So my business, as many of you know, is that I am a consultant and I coach people in juice cleansing, which does not have to include focus on healing overeating. And I also coach people in healing overeating, which does not have to be done on a juice cleanse. However, if you would like to pair the two, and you'd like some coaching, that is something that I do as well. So you can submit questions, or you can contact me for coaching at CourtneyPoole.com, and you can also contact me on my social media platforms as well. So I hope this is helpful, and thanks for watching. I know it's been a bit of a long video, and I'll see you soon. Okay, bye everyone.